Hello, dear students. In this audio presentation, I will analyze some of the important question answers from the same chapter, that is Mother's Day. So, the first question that I'm about to explain, it goes like this: what was wrong in the Pearson's family? Though from outside it looks marvelous, it looks great, it looks a very happy family, but from inside it is something else. So the answer goes like this: Annie Pearson's family was an ideal one when observed from outside. I already told this to you all. Outside its fence, it was lovely, but essentially something was wrong inside. But when looked from inside, something was wrong. The life of the family, Annie Pearson, had reached an alarming level of intolerance and impatience. Very important words that I told right now: impatience and intolerance. Actually, her life has become totally messy, and it seems that it has reached an alarming level of impatience and intolerance. But still, she can't speak out, she can't raise her voice. She had her grunt unheard, but wanted it heard by all. Grunt means grievances, dear students. Now, she wanted her grievances to be heard by all, but unfortunately, it remains unheard because she can't speak. She can't speak out her problems directly to her family members. She had been living like a slave in the family. She is more like a slave, less as a uh, less as a wife or a mother. She acted as a slave. She acted as a servant. She acted as a caretaker. So I repeat this line, dear students. She had been living like a slave in the family, doing work for her husband and children. She wanted them to acknowledge her worth. Acknowledge means to give her the due recognition, but they never ever gave her the due recognition. At least recognize her presence in the family, but still she was taken for granted. And she desperately tried to make her presence felt in the family, but somehow it never worked. I repeat, she desperately tried to make her presence in the family visible to others, that is, to her family members like Doris, Cyril, and to her husband George. But ultimately, it ended up to be a failure because she never ever protested. That was the main reason. And she was extremely polite to her husband and also to her children. And it seems that her over politeness was the cause of her ruin. So I repeat, she had been living like a slave in the family, doing work for her husband and children. She wanted them to acknowledge her worth, or you can say her significance or her importance. At least recognize her presence in the family, but she was too scared of speaking out, lest a spark of ill feeling flew in the family. Now, the important thing was that she had no confidence in her. She thought, if I go on speaking, it might erupt a quarrel in the family. It's better I keep quiet. Now, dear students, I am moving on to the next question. Again, another very important question. What went well in the Pearson's family? When observed from outside, Annie Pearson's family was an ideal one. If you are a visitor, if you want to visit it from outside, if you look at it from outside, it will look a very ideal one. The center of the family was a silent mother and wife. So everything turned and moved silently because she never protested. There was never a huge quarrel in the house because ultimately, at the end of the day, Mrs. Annie Pearson, she was very silent, she was very quiet, she never protested at all. And that was the reason why the affairs in the house moved very silently. So when anyone notices the house from outside or the family from outside, they feel like that it is perfect, but it is not. To be very honest, it is not. Her husband and children were free to live their lives unquestioned, and they enjoyed a business class life. Now, it's a luxurious life. When we consider the life of George, when we consider the life of Cyril and Doris, but when we consider the life of Annie Pearson, it was the life of a colonial slave. Okay, now let me continue. They means the other family members of Annie Pearson. They enjoyed a business class life, half spent at workplaces and half spent with society. They got their food prepared every time without asking for it because Mrs. Pearson, she was always ready in her toes to help the family in whatever way she could without asking any favor in return and desperately trying to get acknowledgement from them, but in vain. Dear students, but it went in vain. So I repeat, they got their food prepared and served in time and got their clothes washed, mended, and ironed by someone who never complained. So the household chores, CHORES, the household work, the preparation of the food, ironing of the clothes, mending the clothes, that means the kitchen section, the laundry section, as well as their hospitality inside the house, everything, every inch of a thing was taken care of by Mrs. Annie Pearson. And most important thing, Mrs. Annie Pearson never ever complained for the fear that it might erupt a quarrel in the minds of her family members. So she never ever complained at all. That was the second answer, dear students. Now I am moving on to the third one. Why is Mrs. Fitzgerald insisting upon Mrs. Pearson's being the boss of her family? Now, why Mrs. Fitzgerald wanted Mrs. Pearson to be the head of the family, or rather to say, why Mrs. Fitzgerald wanted Mrs. Pearson to be the boss of the family or of her family? Because Mrs. Pearson's husband and children considered her as a housemaid rather than a loving and caring mother and wife. Now, Mrs. Fitzgerald's children as well as her husband considered her as a housemaid or a housekeeper or a caretaker, or literally to say as a slave or a servant. She never considered her as an integral part of the family. That was the big mistake from their perspective, and it was very unfortunate from the perspective of Mrs. Annie Pearson. So I repeat, because Mrs. Pearson's husband and children considered her as a housemaid rather than a loving and caring mother and wife, she never ever got her recognition, though she worked tremendously in terms of hospitality, in terms of providing all the necessary comforts and benefits inside the house for her family members. But unfortunately, her family members never ever paid her any attention for it. That was very unfortunate. They demanded everything from her, ordered her to make tea, to tiffin, everything. They demanded everything. Whenever they used to come home, they demanded everything from her, from tea to tiffin, and never thought of her pleasure and liking. And most importantly, how mean minded they are. They never thought about her pleasure, they never thought about her liking at all. They thought that it was her duty to work for them, while they never considered her work as work. Now, they took her for granted, or rather, to say in other words, she was always taken for granted. And it seems that her work was never considered a work at all. That was very unfortunate. The other family members, like George, Cyril, and Doris, they never considered her work as work at all. They were always concerned with their own work. So, at the end of the day, they considered her as a servant, and she was taken for granted despite she used to work really hard for the betterment, for the affection, for the love of her family members. She cared about her family members, but her family members never ever cared for her. That was the main thing. So, dear students, I stop here in this audio presentation. I will explain question number 4 in my next audio presentation. Please listen to the 3 questions that I explained right now. In my next audio presentation, I will continue with question number 4. Thank you, students. Thank you all.